We still need your own phone.
Yes.
Huh? Oh, another one of those.
And then I'm gonna pass the baton.
Another
of those. No, seriously, we need a little kid, like, we have to have, like, I started. All this thing. That's a nice kid.
We're on.
I like that. Board of Education retreat for July 28, 2026 to order at 9:06 AM. And we will start with our meeting procedures. If you are willing to or able to stand, please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll move on to item B3. I'm sorry. We will now move on to our land, labor, and body enforcement. We recognize that we are presently on the lands of the Tochenya, Mawek, McCarthy, and Ohlone peoples and acknowledge them as a first inhabitants of the land we currently occupy. Labor and body acknowledgement. I acknowledge that the burden of environmental exploitation is systematic in the labor of Black and brown bodies in the building of this country and its institutions. I remember that Black and brown bodies were born and died working this land against their will for generations. I also acknowledge the continued contribution of the land of the labor of survivors over the centuries to today of all immigrant labor, including voluntary, involuntary, forced, and undocumented peoples in the building of what we refer to as the United States. Author Dr. Rochelle Rogers Art. West Contra Costa School District Board of Anti-Racism Statement. The governing board is committed to the work of anti-racism, the conscious and active effort to identify, challenge, and correct racial inequities in the systems and institutions within our schools and community. Racism, explicit or implicit, stands in direct conflict to the fundamental principles of district education to carry district education into the future. We recognize that we must continually renew and reflect on the roots of racism and develop new ideas to meet the time. Unjust ideas and policies and racial inequities they produce have shaped us, our schools, our society. The board strives to uncover unconscious biases and practices anti-racism as individuals and as board members. We challenge ourselves to persist through the discomfort necessary for growth and learning, to deepen our listening and our examination of racism and oppression, and to develop a strong understanding of how our personal experience and feelings fit into the larger picture of continued oppression. Each member of the governing board individually and collectively is responsible for creating and nurturing an anti-racist learning environment where each student, staff member, and community partner is respected and valued member of the district community. The governing board is uniquely positioned, and it is our responsibility to identify, dismantle racist ideas and inequitable policies in ourselves and across the district. Therefore, we commit to supporting anti-racist policies, programs, and practices for our children's education and well-being, while building strong and inclusive school community. The board commits to holding each board member accountable toward these goals and moving the work of anti-racism forward. We also commit to holding the West Contra Costa Unified School District staff, students, and community to living these standards of anti-racism in our school. Board approved March 20th, 2024. And now we would move on to roll call.
Board President Inyana,
President.
Clerk Gonzalez-Soy,
Present.
Trustee Reckler,
Good morning, I'm present.
Trustee Smith Folds,
Good morning, present.
and Trustee Hernandez
Absent.
is absent. Thank you.
So we'll now move on to agenda review and adoption. Anything that anyone wants to change on the agenda? Let's see, now we will move on the agenda as presented. So now we will take 5-minute break. Before we start our item B, the West Country Costa item B, Brown Act training. So thank you, 5 minutes. Good morning, everyone. We will now be reading.
And muted.
Sorry, it was me. Okay, we're good.
Sorry.
Reconvening our meeting at 9:24 AM. And we will start off this morning with our Brown Act training.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carlos Villegas, and when I teach young attorneys how to present in our firm, the first thing I normally tell them is you have to be prepared for nothing working. And really, if you have a script going into the day, you probably should rip your script up because the script will hit the fan. And so when I woke up at my hotel this morning, I didn't have a comb, I didn't have a brush, I didn't know where I was going. And so this is kind of all the things that come into, being in education law and being a support for our school district. So I know on this particular board, we have some experienced members, and then I know we have a couple newer members. So what I'm gonna do today is go through a refresher. I'm kind of relieved that we're having it in this setting because I think this will be good for a conversation. So I'm not big on kind of sticking to the script. Obviously, we can be flexible, but throw your questions in along the way. I don't mind. I think it's better if you have something that's kind of, inspiring you at the moment, throw it out there, and then that way we'll tackle it and we'll keep on moving. All right. So the quick overview, first of all, can everybody see on their Zoom what I'm sharing? Okay. All right, and if everybody can see this, the overview is going to be just generally the Brown Act, kind of how that impacts us in 2026 with all the different kind of virtual capacities that we have. We'll talk a little bit about meeting agendas, closed sessions, the PRA and how that plays into what you do both as a board member and in terms of the board meetings that you have. And we will not talk about board self-evaluations. I kind of held that on. I don't think we're going to have time because in preparing for this, I think we want to move relatively quickly, have an hour on this, and then see if we can field the questions along the way. All right. So if you're looking at kind of the law and the Brown Act, presentation went. Now I'm seeing everybody here. There we go. So the school board is a legislative body and it's subject to the Brown Act and the California's open meeting laws. We're going to go through kind of all the different types of committees and boards and subcommissions that are really part of it. And that's really anything that's created by formal action of the board. So if we have a spin-off committee and it's created by the board through an action of the board, that now would be subject to the Brown Act. So you have to agendize those committee meetings. You have to make sure that they're put up and you would comply with all the different requirements of the Brown Act. Now, the exception to that is advisory committees, and those are consisting of less than a quorum of board members. So it's a 5-person board, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so then your ad hoc committees would have 2 or less board members on them. All right, so I want to break out committees just a little bit and kind of give you guys some background, and then we can kind of pressure test that. But if you're looking at standing committees, that is only officially appointed board members can speak in that discussion. So a standing committee is something that the board creates. It is now subject to the Brown Act, and it has kind of ongoing subject matter jurisdiction, meaning this standing committee is going to tackle an issue on an ongoing basis. So when you get to a standing committee, it's important that board members can attend because these are public meetings, right? They've been agendized. So we would never take the position that they can't, attend at all. But when they attend, they have to know that they are really only attending in a support role. And really, I go even further. They're attending as citizens, as individual private citizens, as members of the public. They are not attending as board members. So you're a standing committee. Only the board members who've been named to those committees are really on the committee and will be having the roles.
Are we allowed to ask questions right now, or do you want me to hold on to them?
No, go ahead, jump in.
I guess my only question when it comes to this, if there is the official appointed board member, right, and then the rest of my colleagues decide to join, right, and as the appointed board member, I wanna like just ask a question, just a clarified question from that committee, I won't be able to do it because then now it turns into a board meeting, right? So if it's three or more, so even if someone is in there as an observer, would that still count as a board meeting?
It doesn't because, and here's the difference. So if you have your standing committee and your board members who are named to that committee are participating, they're leading this committee, right? So if you have another board member who's not named to that committee, they're attending really only as an observer. They're attending as a member of the public. So what we normally recommend, and there's a difference between what we recommend and what happens in real life. We're not robots and we understand that. But what we normally recommend for the folks who are attending, that they not participate, that they only observe, right? And to the extent that somebody has a burning question, they just have to ask the standing committee. Let's say they're a board member, they're attending, they're not on that committee, and they just have to ask a question, then we would say you ask it in the same way that any member of the public would be. You go to public comment, you go to side, you make it clear you are not a board member who's engaging with other board members. You are a member of the public who's asking the committee. And that is, and my first response would honestly be refrain from doing so at all. Wait until you get back to your agendized board meeting and then maybe pose the question as part of a board member report. Because here's the other thing. We have specific Brown Act violations, but in my experience from working with board for over 20 years, it is the perception of a Brown Act violation that wastes just as much time and energy of the board and the superintendent than actual Brown Act violations. So a lot of times what we're talking about here is we're giving you these rules. We understand it's substantial compliance. That's what the Brown Act standard is. You're going to do everything you can to comply with the rules. But what you want to avoid is somebody thinking that you didn't comply with the rules. So to answer your question directly, when you come, it's best if you don't engage and you don't participate in the meeting. But if you have a burning question, you have to take off that board member hat and you are now just a member of the public asking that question. So if there's a dais, for example, you're not sitting on it. If there's microphones, you're not behind them. You are wherever the members of the public are and you're there really just as a witness. The less you participate, probably the better. Please.
Sorry. So say that the meeting's online and you get acknowledged as a board member, but you're not part of that, you're not appointed to that standing committee. Do you have to announce, thank you so much for the introduction, but I'm here as a member of the public, just to make it clear, because sometimes the meetings are on Zoom. I'm just trying to.
Sure, no,
because
that's a good question. And we're talking about the virtual world too. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you pressure testing it with some real examples. My first, and keep in mind, been a lawyer for a long time. And my wife tells me that, I don't talk like a human anymore. I talk like a legal bot. But my first preference would be that you don't get introduced at all. And so if any of us are part of that standing committee or the superintendent or staff, let's make a point that the standing committee members are the ones who are kind of running the day for that particular committee. And it's best if we don't even acknowledge or introduce the other board members. But sometimes it's a member of the community or something. We'll say, thank you for attending. I also see you. And then I think to your point, that's probably when you jump in and say, I'm only here as a member of the public. But again, that violates the previous, guidance.
Yeah.
They don't talk at all. But if they put you on the spot, I think making that distinction, making it clear and making sure that it's on the record. There's going to be other places here where we probably caution that sometimes it's better to leave. It's better to exit out of the situation. And so if I were at a standing committee, so let's say there had a couple of people here on the board who were on the standing committee and I attended to observe, and I quickly saw myself getting pulled into the discussion and people were referencing, well, board member Villegas says this, and what do you think about that? And people were trying to pull me into the conversation. I might leave the meeting because I would be feeling like now it's giving the impression that now we are all part of the standing committee. And so again, the perception sometimes of the Brown Act is just as important as the actual rule. Did you have a question?
I did, so I just want to make sure, when you're for standing committee, governance, ongoing assignments that continue year round, that qualifies as a standing committee.
If the board has created that and it's intended to be, permanent and ongoing, then yes.
Okay. I want to be clear, when you said that a tertiary member shows up as a public citizen. So with that though, there is a right to free speech and they would be talking in public comment, or do they lose that? Are you recommending that right, you forego that?
I think we're recommending that the less you participate, the better for the perception that the board collectively is not violating the Brown Act. Now, to my earlier point, we're not robots, and you do not lose your right to attend the meeting or your right to expression. So if you feel it's burning need to participate and to make a comment, you should be clear that you are there as a member of the public. And so this goes back to my earlier point. If a dais is being used, you are not on the dais. If public comments mean you're submitting a card and you're going here and you're making your statement from a certain area with all members of the public, you would follow all the different procedures. But again, the most conservative advice is you're there and you're only observing and you don't say peep. That way there's no confusion about who is permanently on that standing committee.
Can I ask a follow-up? No, never mind.
We're not in a standing committee right now, so you guys you can put it up.
Go, do it, Leslie.
No,
It's burning, I can feel it.
Madam Board President, did you have a question?
No, so, I mean, I guess going back to on the dais, so your recommendation, if we were doing it through Zoom, would be standing committee members within the jurisdiction of the Zoom and everything else to stay outside. But we usually use links that are for board members, right? So we have those spaces where, hey, now we're behind the Zoom as board members. Or do we stay in as a public and go in as a public amenity?
And that question's never been asked, so I appreciate that, and I think that's a perfect example how we apply it to 2026. So at some point, Rosa gave me, she promoted me to a panelist, right? And I think that's the perfect example. So your board members who are on the standing committee, they have all permission. They are the webinar chiefs. They're the people who are seen as leading it. Then anybody who is attending as a non-member of that committee would not have those privileges, would really just be with the rest of the public observing. I think that's a great way from a technological point of view to make the distinction between who's on that standing committee and who's just attending as a member of the public. That's a great question. Thank you. All right. So we shift over to ad hoc committees. These are advisory committees that are less than a quorum. And they must not have continuing subject matter jurisdiction, and they don't have a meeting schedule that's fixed by formal action of the legislative body. So these are kind of one-off issues that maybe the superintendent asks a board member and says, can you look into this particular issue? You and maybe one other board member, or maybe just you by yourself. Can you look into this, report back to the board? And it is temporary, something that is a kind of a one-off issue. All right, now we included a little chart because I think this is a little bit helpful to kind of wrap your heads around the difference between, say, a standing committee and an ad hoc committee. You see the difference between the permanent and the temporary, the scope, and I talked about this, also continuing subject matter versus one single task. And that's definitely how I think of ad hoc committees. They are tackling one particular issue. We're examining music and the budget for music. In the coming year, we want to have a 2 or 3 month study of something, and this 1 or 2 board members, because of their background, because of their interests, they're going to tackle this one single issue. Brown Act, now here's a big difference, right? Our standing committees are subject to the Brown Act. When it comes to our ad hoc committee, these are private meetings. And so one of the other examples of where ad hoc committees I've seen frequently used is when it comes to superintendent evaluations. Oftentimes, there will be an ad hoc committee of 1 or 2 board members that collect all of the input and then help facilitate that process. Sometimes they work with legal counsel on contractual amendments. That's another place where I've seen ad hoc committees used. And so those, for obvious reasons, because of the Brown Act, because of the exceptions for ad hoc committees, these are private meetings. So the ad hoc committee members do not need to agendize them, and they do not need to open them to members of the public. Okay. All right, so public participation in a standing committee, you're going to see a mix of the board, staff, and public. For ad hoc committee, that's less than a quorum of the board, no public, because again, it's a private meeting. Your schedule, standing committees have those regular meetings, your ad hoc committees, once the task is over, that ad hoc committee goes away. And that's important because if that ad hoc committee all of a sudden starts looking like a duck and talking like a duck, seems to be permanent, now it could transition into a standing committee. So you want to make sure that there's something that kind of poof make that ad hoc committee go away, the task is completed. Notice for standing committees, no notice is necessary. It's exempt from the Brown Act, so ad hoc committees don't need any kind of notice. Now, there were some questions earlier about how do you engage, what do you do? And so and I want to drill down on one piece in particular. Why is it important to have certain people on the ad hoc committee and not change the membership? And so, and I was kind of wrestling with this a little bit and thinking about the best way to present on it. But at the end of the day, if we have two board members who start doing the ad hoc committee, then they're not available in the next two meetings. So then we go to the next two board members and they fill in for those board members. And then we come back and we have a fifth board member who now is on the ad hoc committee. At some point, you're going to have almost like a serial meeting as different board members participated in the ad hoc committee. And potentially, remember, the ad hoc committees are not agendized. They are not open to the public. So now through participation in the ad hoc committee, each board member could potentially know, where other board members are leaning on a particular issue, and it's not going to be done in an agendized regular meeting. So keep in mind, the point of the ad hoc committee is for that committee to come back to the general board, then make a report to the board at a regular open meeting or a closed session, depending on the subject matter. Then at that point, the board can then participate in the findings and then get back to kind of regular order, if you will. Now, I don't recommend this, but it is in the materials. And so I'll throw it out there. It's possible that the ad hoc committee needs to hear from a particular board member for a particular issue. There is a way, if you work with your legal counsel, that potentially that board member could be invited to be a witness to a subject. So whatever that subject is, imagine we got two board members and then there's a third board member who has some specific knowledge or something. That to me is, we're getting into extra credit. Let's not go to the graduate course on that. I would say let your ad hoc committee members handle that, because here's again, let's go back to the perception. Even if you do it the right way, the perception can be, well, I have it on good authority that 3 board members were at that private ad hoc committee. I know that because I talked to my cousin, who talked to somebody else's cousin, who saw them walking into Starbucks. Now, all of a sudden, we have a demand to cure and correct, and we have somebody who's alleging that there's a Brown. It's going to waste your time, waste staff's time, and so let's try to stay away from it. All right, please.
Going back to the previous comment about switching board members. For our governance committee specifically, we did appoint an alternate in case, like, both trustee Reckler and I, for example, are appointed to that committee and we both work. So there's been times where, well, not her, but I've had to miss that committee. So the alternate who was appointed to the president has taken my spot. So are you suggesting even for board standing committees, we should also avoid that, or is it only for ad hoc since the private meeting? And then for the other one is an open meeting?
I think you're already on to the answer, more for ad hoc.
Okay.
So for ad hoc, I would say avoid, the swapping in of alternates, and maybe the board could consider, maybe we don't name alternates for ad hoc committees to avoid there being a serial meeting as the opinions are shared amongst them. For a standing committee, I don't have that fear because again, it's been agendized. So if an alternate subs in, it's a regular meeting. It's being kind of, the agenda's out there, the public has an opportunity to participate. I have less concern about that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, let's get to the funner stuff, the exceptions, right? So these are the things that you shouldn't have to worry about, okay? CSBA, I know we have some experienced board members here. So you've probably been to what I call the, board member prom every year, right? So CSBA, everybody comes out, you learn, you get information, you get trained. It's a great opportunity, I think, to grow as a board member. You have no issue about any Brown Act issues by attending CSBA, but let me tell you about an event I used to participate in. So I was one of those parents who are, suckers. I have that volunteer itch where I want to participate and I want to help out, I want to do something. So I sat on the school site council for years while my kids were in school. And as part of the school site council, we would throw the Dia de los Muertos, event every year. And so I used to invite the entire board, and I would usually be relatively proud if the board showed up. And a few years, the entire board showed up. And it really felt validating that the board members would take time out of their schedule to support this event. And the altars were beautiful. And so it was always, we got these great donations, we had great flowers, great food. So it was a really good time. And this is when I was a young attorney. I was at the beginning of my career, so I was probably more a parent than an attorney at that point, right? And doing things for my kids. But one thing I noticed from this very experienced board that my kids attended their school district, is when they would come in the room, even though there's an exception, this is a social event, it's not an agendized meeting, they can have a majority of the board there, and sometimes the entire board was there. I noticed the way that they moved around the room. They did not cluster in a majority. If two people were chatting and they saw one person come up, one person would kind of rotate out. And these were all people who had been on the board 10+ years. They knew how to move in a way to avoid the perception of a Brown Act violation and not just an actual Brown Act violation. And so keep in mind, you could be exchanging recipes for enchiladas, or, you could be having a conversation about sports. If people from across the room see, okay, those three are talking and I know those three are always in cahoots, I bet you they're deciding what they're gonna vote on this issue at the next board meeting in 3 days. The perception can waste your time. And then all of a sudden ChatGPT gets involved, and guess what? They're sending you a 6-page, cease and desist. And then now the superintendent's calling us, and that is not where you want your resources and time to go. But I always learned from that, and that was 20-something years ago, that the way they moved around is that they were always aware. And this is the hard part. You didn't become board members because you wanted to be politicians. You became board members because you were active in your community. There were things that you were supporting. You did it for your kids. But once you put that hat on, you have to be aware of the rules of the game. And so you have to move a little bit like a politician, in the sense that you can't let anybody perceive you to be violating the law. And so you know when to kind of exit stage left. All right. Social ceremonial occasions, of course, football games, teachers of the year, all that good stuff. Those are exceptions to the Brown Act, but keep in mind how you're moving at these events. Sometimes you're going to have open and notice meetings of other agencies, and then open and notice standing committees of the board. We've already kind of hammered those. I'm going to keep moving relatively quickly. I talked about this with the enchilada example, where sometimes it's better just to kind of move on to avoid the appearance that there's an issue, but I'm not going to belabor it now. All right, so we talked about the Brown Act. We talked about all the meetings need to be open. And here's the thing, like so many laws in California, and I love my home state, I'm a native. What is it they say about good intentions, right? So there's a lot of good intentions that go into the laws in California, and they can really trip you up. And if you're looking at public records or you're looking at the Brown Act. Now the purpose, let's go there. Let's go to 30,000 feet. The purpose is transparency. The purpose is to make sure that everything that the board is doing is accessible and visible to the public. And so that's a higher calling. That is a really good purpose. Now we do get bogged down in that purpose, but again, that's the reason why we have these rules. Now the meeting, it's really easy. Anytime you have a majority of the board members that are present at the same time in place, and they're going to hear, discuss, and deliberate on anything that is about the district. Okay, now we throw out this legal term that I don't love, which is subject matter jurisdiction, right? I mean, that is enough to put anybody to sleep. The way to think about it is, if it's district business and we're hearing it, we're talking about it, we're deliberating on it, and there's a majority of the board members there, we're putting ourselves in a bad situation. Keep in mind, now CSBA, the board member prom, all those things, even the Dia de los Muertos events, you could, you have the exception, but you could potentially violate the Brown Act if you all of a sudden at the Dia de los Muertos event decide, you know what, let's go ahead and tackle that one issue. I want to know where you guys are on an issue. Let's get our ducks in a row. Guess what? You've taken something that you were allowed to attend, and then now you've kind of you acted in a problematic way that could be run afoul of the Brown Act. So keep that in mind. All right, serial meetings. I touched on these a little bit. But the idea is that one person talks to another person who talks to another person. So it's not the three all together at the same time. It's kind of the happening one after the other after the other. And this could happen whether it's in person, but it also could happen through, let's say, technology, emails, text messages, and things like that.
Can I ask a
Please.
question about that? One thing that I do just to update the board is send a message. Either if it's email, BCC the board, or a text. And we've already established that no one should be responding directly to those types of messages. Is that keeping in mind with this idea of it not being a stereo?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the BCC. I had a 20-year superintendent who I had to gently coach a couple months to stop being board members. And the superintendent had never thought about it. I was like, if we BCC the board members, it makes it harder for a reply all. And so something as subtle as that, and one other thing I like to do when I'm BCCing board members, or if I'm the one that's communicating, I will usually write in big bolded, all caps, the very first line, one-way communication, do not forward. Now, your superintendent is the CEO of the school district. So the superintendent has to provide you, the elected officials, with information so that you know exactly what to do when you get to the board meeting and you know what's going on with your district. There can also be situations where there is a lockdown, or there is a pandemic, or something happened at a particular site. The superintendent has to communicate with you. And there's no problem with that being a one-way communication where information is going to you. That is the way to do it, and it sounds like that's the approach that's been adopted here. All right. The virtual world, email, website, blogs, texting. I don't even think blogs. I think we need to update that. I don't think anybody's blogging anymore or blogging. Even the Facebook reference, I'm dating myself, but you guys can see any one of these things, really, any form of electronic online communication could potentially lead to a Brown Act violation or the perception of a Brown Act violation. We're going to talk about PRA a little bit later, but let's just say through ChatGPT is open season on PRA requests, and I'm sure this district has been hit just like all the other ones in the state. And so I do probably statewide PRA requests. So those big ones that you see that 100 districts are getting or 500 districts are getting, I help to coordinate those. And sometimes it might take as many as 10 or 20 attorneys to power through these for, all the state. It is a huge unfunded mandate. The legislature needs to fix this, needs to do something about that. But until then, we are stuck with the world that we have and the laws that we have. Some of the new ChatGPT, some of the new AI platforms, when you're plugging in this information, when they're giving you suggestions and information on how to write a complaint, it will also automatically, some of the platforms will just say, do you want to make a PRA request? Is this a public agency? It'll automatically give you a PRA request. So it's not a coincidence that you guys are getting inundated with these types of complaints, and the complaints are often accompanied by PRA requests. The reason why that matters here is because what you're texting, what you're emailing may actually come back and bite you guys, because at the end of the day, if the question that comes to legal is, are these public records, we may be obligated to say, yes, these are public records. And then the public records are released, and the public records reveal that maybe there was a Brown Act violation, or maybe there's a perception of a Brown Act violation. So just keep that in mind. All right, there's a couple new rules. I'm not going to drill down too much because I'm very aware of the time here, so I'm going to kind of move through these relatively quickly. But there's been some Brown Act modernization. The social media rules, where board members are prohibited from engaging on social media in a way that would potentially violate the Brown Act. That was initially, I think it came up during the pandemic, and it was sunsetting in 2026, which sounded at the time like a long way away. We're here. And so that's been extended. And then there's now some accommodations that are being made for teleconferencing via Zoom if you have a disability. There was also an update in SB 1732. I'm not going to belabor this. This one was a little bit more unique to, say, city councils and things like that. But the previous rule was you only violate the Brown Act if it resulted in a final collective occurrence. But now that closes that loophole. So it's banning any series of communications of any kind. I think this is the way we've always trained it. So I wouldn't get overly concerned with what the wolf loophole is or any of this. At the end of the day, if you're using technology to communicate with other people about district business, you have the potential to have a Brown Act violation. All right. So a couple of different ways. So we have the hub and spoke. When that is one board member who's talking, kind of polling and talking to the other board members, right? They're the hub or spoke. I think about how a bicycle works here, but that is one form of potential serial meetings. The other is the game of telephone, right? So it starts with one board member, talks to another board member, who then talks to that board member, who talks to that board member. Of course, by the time it gets to you, the message is lost, but the potential is you may now know how I'm going to vote or what I think about a particular issue. So that in itself could be a problem. So people always ask me, well, does that mean I can't talk to other board members about board business, about district business? And the answer, of course, is yes, you can, because you're in less than a quorum. But this is where we get into a challenge between what you can do and what you should do. in having that conversation, you run the risk that if that person forgets about the conversation with you or is not kind of not thinking about it, and all of a sudden you have a conversation with somebody else, guess what? You guys have just violated the Brown Act. It was unintentional, you didn't mean to it, but it wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have talked to you in the first place. But me talking to you puts you in a spot where now, if you are not disciplined and you don't shut it down from there, we have the potential for a Brown Act violation. So just keep in mind, just because you can do something, if you talk to your lawyers, they're probably gonna give you the conservative legal advice, which is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And as elected members of the board, there is a heightened scrutiny that's on all of you. Please.
This also falls in if the public is telling you how another board member will vote, right? For example, I've had to tell organizations who are calling me like, well, we know how trustee Reckler is going to vote because she told us. And I had to stop and be like, I don't want to know.
That's right.
So that's correct, right? Even if you find out through, what about social media? Let's say like an organization posts, like, we've had a conversation with 3 board members and it's like, would that be considered a Brown Act violation?
Well, yeah.
It doesn't happen often, I don't think, but
I view that more as, politics of those organizations trying to get the board to a particular vote. And so I don't think if an organization posted, we have talked to 3 individual board members and confirmed they will vote yes to support music at the upcoming meeting. I would probably question what that organization is talking about, and I would think they're trying to manipulate the board to get to a certain place. Now, if they did talk to 3 different board members and all 3 of them did confirm that that's the way they're going to vote, then I think it's leaning towards something problematic. So I think you have to have a poker face, and this is the part where it's hard. You didn't get here because you had a poker face. You didn't get here because you were dispassionate about issues. You got here because you wanted to effectuate change. So that's one of the hardest things that I see in working with organizations is sometimes you have to turn back to the organization that got you here. You have to say, as a board member now, I have to operate a little bit differently. And so if I tell all of you what I'm going to do in a meeting, somebody shared that to somebody else, there could be the potential for the perception of a Brown Act violation. Now, in the example that you used, I'm not actually hearing the board necessarily violating the Brown Act or individual members violating the Brown Act. But sharing with people how you plan to vote on a particular issue is problematic. And this can lead to the waste of your board's time as people think that you violated the Brown Act. And the example is perfect. I don't hear necessarily a Brown Act violation because you had conversations with people, but those conversations sometimes can be, can lead the board astray. Well, okay. All right, chain communications, we talked about that. Now, when it comes to what kind of communications that we're trying to avoid or that lead to the potential for a Brown Act violation, substantive conversations, right? We're advancing or clarifying understanding. We're facilitating agreement. We're advancing emotions, briefing or information sessions. Now, that is, I think, a very traditional way to think about it, right? Is there any meat in the email? Is there any meat in the conversation or the text message? But keep in mind, under the new social media rules, it could be a thumbs up. It could be an emoji or something like that that could potentially make people believe what you think or how you plan to vote. To me, that's the more critical piece. Did you respond in the communication in a way that tipped your hand as to how you plan to vote outside of a regular scheduled meeting? That to me is the critical piece. So be careful. If you're writing an email thinking, I'm going to thread the needle on this, I'm going to kind of express my support, but I'm not going to say this, I'm not going to say that. Just keep in mind, anything that you're doing in writing, especially if you're talking to one of those third parties, that's probably all going to be public records. So you should be very careful how you're communicating. And here's the other thing, and this is not to get around the Brown Act, but I do think it's probably better if those people reach out to you and say, give me a call. Let's meet up for coffee. I'd rather you have a conversation with somebody than to now create a bunch of writings that people are pointing to subject to the PRA that they're going to make some leap that you violated the Brown Act. All right. So when it comes to emails, and the superintendent touched on this earlier, and the big piece here is we're not forwarding those emails. If there's a one-way communication from the superintendent about some substance, district business that you need to know, then take that, do not forward it, don't do anything with it. But keep in mind, I like that people are being BCC'd, So you should assume if it's coming from the superintendent, the rest of the board is on. If it's a board communication, then the other board members are gonna be BCC'd. So just know that they're all getting the same information that you're getting. So once you get that information, you cannot talk about it with other board members for all the reasons we discussed. You should refrain from it because you can quickly lead to a serial meeting outside of that. Now, some of these other tips are just reminders to you that what you're writing often can be a public record. And so what I tell boards all the time, I tell superintendents is there's no exemption for embarrassment. If you wrote something a little, let's say off color in the email and we get a PRA request, that happens all the time. We may recommend to you that that would be a public record and probably should be released to the public. So just keep that in mind in the way that you're communicating. You now are an elected official. All right, any other questions on that before I move on? Avoid reply all at all costs. Reply all is not your friend when you're a board member. All right, so we talked about texting, blogging, social media, and I think we talked a little bit about serial meetings. One thing that we haven't necessarily touched on is texting during meetings. And so the one thing I would throw out there, and so I was working with this board years ago, and they had given everybody laptops. And the laptops were intended to follow the presentations from staff. I think at the time they were really in this push to stop using paper. So they had these laptops or maybe it was iPads. And so they would get the information. And somehow at some point, somebody figured out how to kind of jailbreak the texting function. And so you would see a board member on the left-hand side of the dais would kind of look down their iPad or laptop. And then you'd see a board member all the way on the right-hand side would look down and then would smile or laugh or react. And then it was clear the two were communicating via text on these laptops at the same time. It wasn't too long before a member of the public picked up on this and now submitted a PRA request for all the text messages between those two board members. Now, in the end, I don't remember it leading to much of an issue having to do with the Brown Act or anything. I think they were just like joking around throughout the meeting, which also led to allegations that they were in cahoots or that they had some kind of relationship. At the end of the day, it wasted time. It wasted energy. It wasted resources. That's probably my biggest message. There was no Brown Act violation. And as your legal counsel, we could always help you guys with cures and correct. But the perception of a Brown Act violation here was just as bad as an actual Brown Act violation. All right, serial meetings prohibited. The only exception is the members may communicate outside of a public meeting in order to answer questions or provide information. So one thing that you might see is a board member misses a meeting. So a board member reaches out to a board member and say, hey, I missed the report on A, B, and C. Did that happen? Yes, the report happened. Who has the report? Superintendent and staff have the report. Thank you very much. So that is information. I wasn't there. I missed it. I asked another board member. That board member gave me information, didn't talk about how they voted or how they plan to vote. I'm now going to go to my superintendent. I'm going to get the information. And I did not talk with the superintendent about this in advance, so I hope she forgives me. But you need to use your superintendent because your superintendent is the person who can give you information and can keep you clear and steer away from Brown Act violations. So very effective boards use their superintendent in a way to get that information to do district business. To me, that's always the safest way. That's your CEO. So it makes it easier for you to get the information that you need. And I'm sure you've been in board meetings where you have questions about district business and you ask the superintendent that question, and the superintendent will then refer to a member of cabinet and say, we're going to get that information for you. That's the cleanest way to do it. And so as weird as it sounds, try not to rely on your other board members, because again, it leads to the perception that people know what you're thinking or know how you're going to vote, and there could potentially be a Brown Act violation. All right, I'm going to keep moving here. So we talked about this earlier, that the communications may occur only if the person doesn't communicate to other members. If I were a board member, I wouldn't want to take that risk, right? And it's not that I don't trust my fellow board member, but it's like I'm putting them in a spot. If I'm a board member and I come to you and I want to talk about some district business, I'm now putting you in a spot where you know where I'm at. And I don't know if like, for example, if I'm telling you, you don't know if I've already talked to another board member. You don't know if unwittingly you're now part of a Brown Act violation, because before I came to talk to you, I came to talk to another board member. So to use the example that you used earlier, you might want to consider, love you board member, but if you're going to start getting into that, it's probably better that I probably better, I don't hear this right now because I don't want there to be any perception that there's a Brown Act violation. Being an elected official is a strange thing. You're gonna have to work in weird ways. Again, this is just a reminder, these meetings, are not covered by the Brown Act. So individual contact, we talked about it, not necessarily a violation in and of itself. There's always a big risk there. Public conferences, other meetings, community meetings, social gatherings, none of those are subject to the Brown Act. We talked about you can't discuss district business, so I'm gonna keep moving. Meeting agendas, 72 hours in advance for regular meetings, 24 hours for special meetings at a location freely accessible to the public. So this is a public meeting. So if a member of the public wanted to come in, we would accommodate them and then they would get all these materials that you guys have probably heard a million times and, for your experienced board members. All right, the agenda descriptions, again, think substantial compliance. So I get a lot of questions. Did we do this perfectly? I don't think that's the requirement on the Brown Act. The requirement on the Brown Act is that the public has to know and have an idea of what kind of business you're bringing before the board. That is the critical piece. So as long as there's a brief general description of the item that's going to be described, it doesn't have to be a long opus. You have satisfied your obligation to have a correct agenda for board business. All right. Now, if it's not on the agenda, you can't take any action on it. And this comes up usually in the context of somebody making a public comment. They really want to rope you into an issue. It's not even on the agenda. So what I would do as a board member is, and again, this is where using your superintendent is important. I would probably say, thank you for your comments. I'm going to direct your comments to the superintendent who can report back at a later meeting, or can say who can report back if necessary, right? Because keep in mind, they may be talking to you about tinfoil hats and how, there's jet streams and some really interesting concepts, right? The superintendent might say, you know what, we're not going to spend district resources looking into that and looking into the radio waves and how they affect Moon and Mars. I think we're going to move back on to our district business. So use your superintendent as that buffer, who can kind of help decide when district resources are going to be invested, working with the board president, of course, on the agenda. Because sometimes something will come up and it goes to the board president. Almost all your board bylaws, typically, the board president will work with the superintendent to set the agenda. And the board president has to decide, is this something that we're going to invest time in at the next meeting? Or you know what? This has already been addressed. We're not going to invest time in this. We've already kicked this horse too many times. We're just going to move on. So use the superintendent. Superintendent can support the board president, and that's the best way to do business. All right. Now, there's one other note here to ask questions of the staff or the public for clarification. Keep in mind, it's like, be careful what you wish for. If you ask for that clarification, you may just get it, and you may just spend another 15, 20 minutes on the topic if you're getting clarification from a member of the public. I know the public comment wouldn't last that long, but sometimes I think the best response is simply to refer to the superintendent and kind of be done with a particular issue. Imagine if every member of the public, you guys went and asked clarification, you guys would probably be there all night. I'm sure your board meetings already run late as it is. All right, we talked about asking staff to report back. You can make brief announcements. Sometimes these are going to be part of your board member reports. And again, if there's no need to take immediate action, just remember, when the agenda is posted, that is the appropriate time to kind of take up an action and then potentially have a board action on an item. So board members may ask to have a specific matter placed on a future agenda. Your bylaws will tell you exactly what those rules are. I've seen a couple different ways. Sometimes it's automatic, where if the board member asks, it will be on the next meeting. Other times I've seen it in a 1-2 punch, where the board member asks for it. At the next meeting, it'll be agendized for all the board members to vote to decide if at the following meeting, it will actually be on the agenda. So I didn't review that particular piece before I came in. If you guys want us to kind of unpack that, we can. Normally, the way I've seen it and kind of using regular courtesy and working with the board president, if a board member raises an issue that is, relevant to everybody and hasn't been addressed, then normally the board president will find time in upcoming meetings to address that issue. All right. So I'm going to move on. Emergency meetings need no advance notice. These are very specific issues where, there's a potential to severely impact public health or safety. Talk to your legal counsel before you're scheduling an emergency meeting. But that's something that typically, there's going to be 1 hour notice. Then you got dire emergency meetings. You just have to tell the media at the same time the members are being notified. we're all hoping that nothing in any one of these categories is happening to your district. So just keep in mind.
By media, how extensive? You said you have to just let the media know. I don't think we've ever been in a dire, maybe COVID, but outside of that.
They wouldn't even do it for COVID.
And that's a good example, actually. It's a great example. So, but to the point, if there was something that happened, something like that, then you're telling your board members, I don't think you would copy the media on that, but the idea is you're substantially complying where you can say, I notified my board members at 9:01, I notified the local media at 9:02.
Paradise Fire.
There you go.
Would be something.
Yeah, so something that was a dire emergency, a crippling disaster, mass destruction, terrorist act. So 1 hour notice may endanger the public. So we don't even have an hour. But the idea is you're not just telling the board, you're telling the media. And I would suspect that in working with the board secretary, there's probably a list of people who automatically get the agenda. And on that list is probably members of the local media. So I would kind of think about that and say, who are your frequent flyers? Who are your local media people that always come to your board meetings? And so maybe have a short list and boom. They're the last people you're probably going to be thinking about at that moment. But again, this is the point of transparency. All right, we talked about regular meetings and special meetings. I'm not going to go through that, but actually here it is in the context of public comment, so it's a little bit different. So I'm going to tackle this for just really quickly. At a regular meeting, they have an opportunity to address the board on any district business. Regular meeting, any district business. And I think here's one thing I've learned about public comments. Sometimes it takes longer to shut down a public comment than to simply let it run its course. Now, is this a 1 minute or a 3 minute district or somewhere in between?
Or two.
You're a 2 minute district, okay. So those 2 minutes, just in the time when the person starts talking, to shut them down, to say this, to kind of readjust them. Sometimes it takes longer to do that. Then it's like, well, does my time restart? Before you know it, you've spent 5, 6, 7 minutes kind of figuring out this one person's comment. In my opinion, as long as this person is not completely disrupting the meeting or saying something that is offending everybody or threatening people, I think let it run its course. Then, do you guys turn off the mic, or do you have, because you guys already have a system, give them their 2 minutes, hit the mic, hit the buzzer, and then we're moving on to the next one. Okay. Now, at special meetings, you have an opportunity to address the board on any item, but it has to be the one that's agendized. Now, here's the concept. It's a special meeting. We had 24 hours notice. Special meetings are not done for silly reasons. They're done because the board has to take something on that is specific to that meeting. So you don't want a member of the public just, we don't want 20 people there wasting time on the music program when the special meeting has to do with a very important personnel action. So keep them focused and say, I'm sorry, that's the point where I actually would cut them off. And maybe I would even look at the board comment when they submit cards here. Okay, and on the cards, do they hint at what they're going to talk about or just their names?
They should.
No, they
They
do.
should.
Okay,
There's
they
space
should.
for them.
They should, right? Mine might say, et cetera, ... So I think if your meeting is about personnel action and they put in their music program, then what you probably would say is, Mr. Smith, before you begin, your comment card says you're going to talk about music. That's not why we're agenda. This is a special meeting. If you don't have anything to say about an agendized matter, I would ask that you refrain from speaking, please.
So if I understand correctly, though, you have options in the special meeting. You may schedule open public comment, or you may schedule public comment that is only for items on this agenda. Is that accurate?
I think the way I think about it is at every meeting, you have public comment, period, full stop. Every meeting has to have public comment. Difference is, if it's a regular meeting, the public comment could be about anything having to do with district business. If it's a special meeting, it has to be about something on the agenda.
Oh, huh.
Yeah. And to your point, I don't know that boards police this necessarily. And for the reasons I just described earlier, right? And I've been at special meetings and I've seen people jump up and start talking about, the changing of the mascot. We're here for a personnel reason. We're here on a Saturday. It's got nothing to do with the mascot, but this person wants to talk about the mascot. And so I've seen, I've leaned forward sometimes. I've locked eyes with the superintendent or the board clerk, and they've looked at me like, you know what? I'm just going to let this run and we're going to be out of here. And then I'm like, I'm not going to jump in because they want to just let the 2 minutes go. we'll move on. But keep in mind, if you have 30 people who are there and they all want to talk about the music program, and that is not why the special meeting was convened, in a situation like that, you might have to shut it down.
So to be clear again, we should have some sort of text that says that the public comment for this special meeting is for items directly on this agenda. Is that?
I think it's helpful when that comment card is completed, but if it's not, and I'm at a special meeting, and I take it that you guys probably don't have very many special meetings, maybe a few a year. Oh, dang, okay, maybe a few more. So when you have these special meetings, let's say I'm looking at a comment card, right? And I see it's blank. So, Mr. Smith, thank you, welcome to the dais here. I just want to make sure before you begin your comments that it is about an agendized matter. Mr. Smith says, sure, it kind of is. And then they start on the agenda as, we should not be taking this personnel action because, the tinfoil hats and the moon and the Mars and all that. At that point, you're looking at the clock and you're like, I hope this just runs its course.
I think, I'm trying to get what you're saying. Does it have to be on the agendas?
Do we?
Specifically on the agenda with the 20 word or less, put on there, public comment will only be addressing items on the agenda when it's a special meeting. Like, is there a note that has to be on there
I like
around the
note feeling.
public comment?
Yes.
So that people aren't confused, because if we're shifting to doing things different, not policing this. But if we're not making this shift, like for the continuance, can we specify on the special meetings around our agenda, where it's public comment, like, public comments will be taken on agenda items, blah, 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 versus leaving it open to interpretation of our regular meetings, any board comment is that.
I like it as an idea to clarify for people who want to make a public comment. So I can see a scenario where you have on your regular agenda items, or your regular agendas, you would have something that public comments shall be permitted on all matters, having to do with district business.
We do, very clear.
So that
Yeah.
makes, now on your special meetings, you might have public comments will be limited to items on the agenda. Boom.
See, because everything you're writing down, I'm like, all right, we're gonna bring that to our standing committee.
Well, and these are little ways that you can improve your governance and kind of get to a smoother meeting. And then, by the way, going back to the example I was using, when you say, all right, Mr. Smith, as we've stated in the agenda, we're here for a special meeting, and special meeting public comments are limited to items on the agenda. I just want to make sure before you begin, your comments are limited to the agenda items. So I think that's a good way. I always like to tie something back into what's on the agenda or what's in the policy. It's not me, board member Villegas, just making up rules as I go. This is things that the board has decided. These are our bylaws. These are the Brown Act. This is what we're supporting, all these collective rules. This is not about me. Did you have a question?
It's more of like procedurally, I mean, we get a lot of public comment in this district, and a lot of it also is on Zoom, so they're actually not gonna place what they're speaking on. Well, I also don't see it feasible for the board president to ask it as a fact, especially when they're zooming in. So I think that probably, I agree, I think the speech at the beginning that you make, right, every meeting of like public comments for this, I think probably is the most appropriate, otherwise it'll be really difficult for you to make it every time.
Well, I don't think making it, I think my whole thing is giving people clarifying, like if we have a special board meeting and we see 20 people show up,
Right.
it's easier to have that clarification in there than people deciding, hey, President Ayana decided today that we're not allowed to give public comment on anything,
That's right.
because usually at all our meetings, we're able to public comment on anything, right? So it just kind of supports, I think, the push from the board on procedures, having it in, solidifying it in writing. I know that during our regular public meeting, we're able to take everything, but it just kind of started getting people accustomed to the I didn't know.
Yeah.
And if we do one day have 50 people show up to our special board meeting.
And you might,
That's what I'm saying, because we haven't solidified that, right? We haven't solidified of what action we're taking on certain items, and it's helpful to have it on there. Because we always have angry people,
Yeah.
right?
For sure.
I like both, to be honest with you. I like it being on the agenda, and then I like the idea of the board president making a comment. Just a reminder to everybody, this is a special meeting, so any public comments will be limited to items on the agenda.
We can write a script. Little script.
Okay.
Great.
All right, we talked a little bit about public participation and regular special meetings. Now, one thing to keep in mind, you can't do the public comment at the end once all the business is taken care of. The point of the Brown Act, again, is transparency in the conduct of the people's business. That also means public participation. So the public has to have the opportunity to make a comment before or during the consideration of that matter. Some boards will have all the public comments at the very beginning, and even if the meeting goes on for 4 hours, everybody had their shot. Other boards, they like being there all night long, so they have a series of public comments that are when those particular matters are gonna be discussed. The style is up to you.
Question around that, cause we have both, so we have the big public comment space right at the beginning of the meeting, but then we also have particular comment spaces during each item that we're talking on. Is there a way that we can push to have people fill out those comment cards completely? And I think, cause that's something that we've had previously, to where like, hey, if somebody's talking on item F, but you know, we haven't started the agenda, like, I'm just gonna talk about item F during the regular public comment, because I don't wanna be here all night, right? And specifically in our, you know, what we've tried to do is like, wait till the item is called and then speak on it. Not to have 50 people take up the first 2 hours, because we've done over 2 hours of public comment at the beginning. So that by the time we're able to do the work, like, can we enforce legally from that standpoint of like, we need to have a completed comment card, so we ensure where everybody's space is at? Because,
You can, but there's a couple challenges. The first, I think, is logistical, right? Because you are board members, so you're going in, you have your board member hat on, you got your game face on, you have your agenda, you are going to go conduct your business, right? You're not gonna really have a lot of time to sort through the comment cards. That's gonna be staff that are gonna be helping with that. So the first logistical challenge is staff now is running around. Sometimes they know the people, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the names are complete, sometimes they're using, an alias. So it puts a lot of pressure on staff to try to figure out, okay, this person put 7E, but I think it meant 7F because what they're talking about in the comment. So now you have staff members kind of in the crowd trying to figure out from the people what they're gonna do. So that's kind of a logistical challenge. The other challenge, I think, is the legal one, which is, let's say somebody gets it wrong. Let's say they are a 7A and they should have been 7F. It's just a well-intentioned error. They didn't do it right. Do we want to put ourselves in a position where we're shutting down public comment? Now we have the ACLU knocking on our door because they've heard that in our district, we don't let people make the comments. In my mind, and this is a hard one because I don't want you guys to have an open public comment session that lasts for 2 hours because you front loaded all of them, right? But then it kind of gets you to a place where if you have individual public comments and somebody is wrong, then I think, let me go back to your original question, because I think that's gonna be the most helpful. Can you find a way to steer the public to make the comments at the right time? Short answer, yes, you can. Just know that in doing that, staff is gonna be your enforcers, for lack of a better word. So when staff gets a public comment card, they're gonna look at it and they're gonna say, okay, this is about the personnel report. Okay, personnel report is in 8C. So I think what staff would maybe do is and I don't know how we would set this up, but staff would need to figure out, okay, when it comes to Mr. Smith is coming to the dais right now. He's walking up and he's there at the beginning of the meeting. We haven't even gotten to item 2 and he's already trying to make his public comment, but we see on the card that he wants to talk about 8C. So now what do? Do we have the member of the staff go to talk to Mr. Smith and say, I think your comment comes later at 8C? Mr. Smith might say, you know what, I can't, I have to work a night job. I can't, this is my only time I have to give a comment. So I think you can and should have ways where you steer these people to the right times, but there's always gonna be exceptions.
I think again, some scripting. We can make a nice script that's not,
one thing is just, it's just that we've had this conversation before, like, how do we make public comment more efficient to be able to then move on to the conducting of the work? Because sometimes even after 2 hours, we still won't be done with public comment. And then at the end of the meeting, where, people are upset because we didn't get to finish the agenda, because we couldn't take on work, right? Because it's just like, it's already, been at board meetings for so many hours and hearing public comment for so many hours, right? So it's just like, how do we manage some of that to be able to then get on to the work?
If your public comments are growing, I mean, first of all, good on you. The community is interested. I've been to some board meetings and nobody's there and nobody cares, right? So good on you. The public is
And what's the
is
topic?
overly interested in what you're all doing, so that's probably a good thing sometimes until it's not. But I do think that there's ways through governance. What I would probably be doing is looking at your board bylaws and saying, do we need to create an exception where, first of all, if there's 30 people that want to talk about one topic, there are strategies to limit your time. There could be a motion because we have 30 people that all want to talk about 7C. I think we're gonna limit this. We're gonna ask that people consolidate their comments. There are things that you can do to make those more efficient. But I think it's better that Madam Board President is not the dictator who's deciding this. It's better that your bylaws have some flexibility to account for these situations. That's where you guys, through a governance training session, you start saying, okay, look, these public comments are getting to the point where we're probably spending more on public comments than we are on substantive business. It's important that we hear from the public, but it's also important that we get our business done, right? And so the public is just addressing us, but we still have to do this meeting. So that's where I would create some flexibility in your bylaw, maybe to limit the amount of the amount of time for individual people, maybe to consolidate, maybe to steer people to different item matters. And maybe it says in your bylaw, if you indicate that you are going to make a comment about a particular matter, we are going to hold your comment until that matter is discussed. So that way it's fair, and that way the board gets that information before they consider the particular matter. There's ways we can kind of tinker with it, but I wouldn't want any board president to be on the hook to do that by themselves. I want that to be reflected in the bylaw. Does that help? Painfully so?
I have some ideas.
Cause I think we've juggled a lot of like, you know, even allocating, I think, staff time to like ensuring that, you know, we have staff at the table who's willing to, hey, when you turn it in, look at it right then and there to kind of address some of those before they even hit the next step, which is the board. But it's just, you know, how do we kind of manage some of that to be able to move on items? Because I think once we bend the rules, like if we say, hey, we're letting this one slide, and then everybody else, because they wrote it on there, is now having to speak, then people get really angry, and then they're just like, we all wanna speak now, because if you let one, we all have to do it. So we're really one of those that we have to start establishing, I think, those things that our expectations on certain things. Because if we kind of let one thing slide, then it becomes a bigger problem.
Absolutely, and you have to be consistent in how you apply it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and by the way, I don't think this is a topic where you get there and it's all good. I think this is something where every single year you have to double down on the bylaw. You have to look and see, do we need to revise it? Okay, we're good. And then we have to have staff consistently work on it over and over and over again. So it gets to the point where the public accepts the procedures and then they know how it's done. And I've had some boards that are really strict. They say you have to submit your card by 15 minutes before that board meeting begins. That board has made a strategic decision. In order to get the efficiency that they want, they're willing potentially to entertain the risk of a challenge that they denied somebody a public comment. So threading that needle and getting to the place where, hey, we got some efficiency, but we had some rules. You can't just break in at 7:03 when the meeting's already started, and you want to have a 3-minute comment on something that's not going to even be discussed for 3 hours. So staff has to be willing to kind of jump into the fray and then get information. There's something you guys can play around with this idea that you're taking public comment cards, but they have to be complete. So if your public comment card is not complete, then it may not be honored. But again, the risk that you're running is that somebody's going to say, you denied me the ability to speak. I think if you're setting this up through the bylaw, that's probably the most way. Have legal counsel pressure test the bylaw to make sure that nobody's being denied public participation. Please.
And then after the first hour, we go from 2 minutes to 1 minute.
I like that.
However, that's always an issue. Because then we have folks saying, well, I came in early and I submitted my public comment at this time, but I wasn't able to speak my 2 minutes. That's something that happens every time that there's a hot topic. Is there a way that, I'm not sure if it's in the bylaws, I haven't that we can put it in the bylaws of like making it more official. Because I think we
Sure.
just announced it,
It's in.
it's in there?
Yes, we just approved, didn't we just approve that, I think? I think so.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't, it's about to.
Okay,
Yeah, but we wrote that in.
okay. Yeah,
You know
fine.
what, I liked the concept and then I immediately regretted it, right? Because what I realized is if we had, because I think it's a great idea, right? We have gradations. So if you're at the beginning of the meeting, you know, we have a little bit more time, but if it's already 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, we have to start winding this down. But I realized that people are gonna game that. So if I know my comments about 8F, but if I wait till 8F time, I'm only gonna get 1 minute, I'm definitely gonna go out of order.
Oh, we have
Because-
that. Yeah.
And so I think having that kind of varying rule is problematic. And maybe the better way to go about it is that the entire board can decide if public comment is gonna be reduced or whatever it is. What I might like to see is if you're in a place where you know that we've gotten a certain amount of public comment cards. Matter of fact, that could be the way you do it is if we receive over 5 public comment cards about a particular topic, we will reduce the speaking time to 1 minute or something like that. I'm throwing out random numbers, but an idea.
I think the way it's written, and I'd have to check, is the first hour is 2 minutes. Order received, you know, when they come in, alternate Zoom and in person. At the end of the first hour, I think it says, with consent of the board or something like that, like proposed by the president, but with the consent of the board or some sort of language like that where it's not just the board president, it's, you know, the body that's deciding to extend.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I guess the only thing I'm feeling out of that is that it's lopsided, right? So anybody it creates an environment where if I want my full time, I need to push in the 2 hours, and that goes right to your point. Now you're out of order. Somebody's gonna go out of order because they want full time.
I think my question is now, how much longer and on Zoom, so one of the hardest things for us to manage has been Zoom, right? I think that's a really touchy subject because in my eyes, I'm like, I want it to be fair across the board, right? But we'll have people come in, public comment, put a public comment card in, but also get on our Zoom line, because if there's 5 people on Zoom and their line goes quicker there because we're alternating from a Zoom and in person, and you came in at number 40 in person, but you're 5 on the Zoom, like, how can we manage, I think, some of that, or is it that now we're shifting this back all to like in public, you know, in present public comment?
So not a legal question, but what I hear you saying is, so people are coming in and they're submitting cards to vote and just kind of waiting to see which comes up first. Yeah, and I would probably be leaning on staff to weed out some of those things, right? Because if I see 2 John Smith, then I think we're only gonna take 1 comment from John Smith. Now, the question for me is, does it matter? Because once John Smith speaks the first time, they're not speaking again, are they?
No.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm talking more about the fairness around that time frame, right? Cause you're trying to get in within the first hour, right? So if we have, you know, 30 people in, you know, they're in present and they submitted their card, but hey, I just showed up and now I wanna put get on the Zoom quick because there's no line there. Like the fairness of the complaints about, cause we're alternating, right?
Yeah.
And trying to, like, how much further do we have to continue to take Zoom? Like, is that a shift that we could potentially
And
make
also,
to?
sorry to interrupt, and also it's like, when they get called on Zoom, they come up to the mic instead of doing their public comment. So that has happened a lot, where it's like, they raise their hand on Zoom, they have a public comment, but then when Rosa or Nancy call them on Zoom, instead of unmuting on Zoom, they go up to the mic.
So they're there on Zoom in person.
Yeah.
So they got Zoom going on their phone and they're there in person. So what I might consider doing in a situation like that, if I see you and you're giving me a public comment card, then I also see that you're in Zoom, that I might disregard your Zoom and I might just pop you into in person. You don't get the option to be in Zoom when you're there present, if that makes sense.
Okay, I have a question to my colleagues. So how do they know that the Zoom line is shorter?
Well, I'm not
Can they
saying,
see?
I'm not saying that they know.
You see, but they don't see.
No, they
They're
don't.
just submitting both.
I think they can see
I
it.
think they can see the
No.
raised hands.
They would
No, I don't
know,
think
they would
that-
know once you stop alternating.
No, but
They
I
would
think
know
that they
nobody's
don't know, they just pick both sides to just see when they're
They
getting.
can't see
I don't
raised
think so.
hand, no?
No, I don't think so. I think they're just going in there hoping that, hey, I can be called within the 20, within the hour and see where I get called first. I think that's my concern, that it's just like you're double dipping into two different settings. Because we might have a shorter line over here, that then there's, high, that you might not be called within the first hour.
Okay, so they may not really know.
No, they don't know,
They're
but they're
just being
just-
like, okay.
Yeah,
let's see
or
what
we've
jump
had it
comes
to
up
where it's
first.
like, hey, if I don't get called within the first 2 hours and I have to go home, at least my hand is still online in the Zoom quick, so then I can just
Got it.
exit and we'll call in person and it's like, hey, they're not here, and then we'll call them online and it's like, now they're on Zoom, right? It's just, they're kind of double it.
Yeah, and
Okay, and then my other just concern that we'd have to be very sensitive to is, I mean, like, running public comment is like a job within itself. I mean, it's like,
yes,
I mean, so I think we should try and simplify what we've got going on. In whatever way we can. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but I mean, like, just listening to the logistics of how this small part, this part is managed is like crazy.
yeah, and I already found a problem with the idea that I had, which is if people, right, if people are here in person, we're only gonna honor you in person. But the example that you just used was problematic because let's say I spent 2 hours here and I still wanna make my comment, but I submitted both because I knew I had to go, and now I'm on my way to my night job, and now I'm making my comment via Zoom. So maybe the idea is, if you're here in person, we're only gonna honor your in-person, your comment card. We're not gonna
But that
give you a
would,
separate.
that would mean that they would need to know all of these people, and perhaps they do because there's a regular,
No, right, yeah.
Yes, some, but she may not, I mean, they may not know everybody who's doing this, or there could be people that are confused, or, once again, they're leaving the same, I mean, like, the advice I got from CSBA when I went to the training, for some reason, we got into this long discussion about public comment, and they were just like, you know what, just let everybody speak, don't risk it.
Yeah.
So,
And that's good
I was
advice.
just being very accommodating and reminding people like, oh, you didn't submit a public comment card in the future, yes, you may make public comment in the future, please submit a card. Like I would just be in this reminder mode rather than,
And it's.
There's always a risk if you cut out public comment.
Right. Does it help though, if there was a shift and it was clearly, stated in the bylaws, that the focus is on the folks who are in person, and that you exhaust the in-person list and then shift to Zoom?
use the lawyer.
You're looking at me, I'm just looking at the board, because I know this is something that has been a challenge this year. Is it that we focus on the folks who are in person and present, and then shift to taking off the people who've already spoken, and that remaining Zoom group is that group? And then it's also maybe a shift to, and we do webinar? If we shift it to webinar and asking people to actually register and have a piece where they can, if they plan on public comment, then they can also submit. And that's something that, is a required thing. Which item are you creating a public comment for? And it's required
Boards
for
do that.
what this is about,
But
Yeah,
you have
like
to be very-
form won't go through unless you indicate
what you're actually gonna be
what,
talking.
what you're actually gonna be talking about, or you're gonna put the number. I'm open to all those things, I think, but I'd like to see it in your bylaws and not necessarily done on the fly. I think that was one of your concerns.
We can put a best practice in bylaws.
And I think the bylaws should reflect some of what you just said, because my now right is that, hey, I have special needs and I have accommodations and I can't show up to the meetings. And now you're putting me at the end of the agenda because I am in a place where I can't be there in person. So just.
Yeah.
I mean, no, thank you. I mean, I really appreciate the conversation. I think that I've had this conversation on this board almost every year for the last 6 years. I think that public comment in this district is a huge challenge. Like, board meetings have always ran till 1 in the morning here, like. Even before most of us got on the board, we've been in these spaces. I think that every time we have tried to change public comment, we have always gone back to just leaving it open because. To your point, like, we have always valued community voice. And I think as hard as it is for all of us to be there at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, like, we all know that, especially every single person here either volunteers or works the next day or has to take care of their home, right? Like, there's so many challenges to come with it, or have to go to work at 7 in the morning to do what we just talked about the night before. Like, changing things to become tighter and to limit public comment, I have always seen it as backfiring on the board. So I think that it's more about like repetition of our procedures, like, please make sure you're signing up for the item that you wanna comment. If not, then we just let them. But then also, I think that something we don't do enough is leveraging our relationships with the groups that come. Cause really the problem is not the one-off people who come and make public comment for the first time, or who come but like a different subject. It's like, for example, when one of the union comes with 100 people, right, and have 100 comments on the same thing, or someone comes to make a comment on study trips with 30 people, and it's like, okay, we get it. Study trips are important, right? So I think it's more of leveraging those relationships, being like, hey, we see there's 200 of you, like, we understand the messaging you're trying to make. Could you choose 10 people to make your message heard? And have those people be the sports speaks, or the people who are speaking in behalf of you. Because I think that it actually backfires a lot of times, because one, we're exhausted after 3 hours, right? Or two, like, we're upset at that point for being yelled at by 200 people on the same subject, right? So I think that maybe leveraging those relationships would get us further than us trying to limit people from speaking, because I don't think that that will be. I mean, I've seen boards where it's like 25 minutes of public comment, right? Like, that's it, that's all you get, whoever signed up, and period, right? Like,
Right.
and I think in those spaces, people really resent their boards, right? And like, they don't feel like it's an open space for them, so I don't know, I just wanted to make a comment that I feel like we have tried extremes. When we first joined the board, right, we had a board president who tried extremes, right? Like, public only at the end of the meeting, like, you only get 10 people to speak, right? Like, and like, we hated that, right? I think most of us did. Like, so I think that we just gotta, in my opinion, try our best to share with people, like, listen, like, this might be an action you take, but it's maybe not the most effective way for you to get your message across to the board than either meeting with us or having just a specific number of folks.
There have been times, I can't exactly recall, but if a group was angry, I have said to them something like, you're all welcome to speak on your own and come up and you can all do public comment. But it might be more effective if you choose a speaker and you all come up together and stand together in solidarity. I think I have said that on occasion.
And I think it's gonna take a shift from the board, right? I think my only concern is that, yes, I agree, people are gonna be upset by not doing their public comment, but they're even more upset when we don't get to finish the job that we were put up there to do. So it's like one or the other, they're gonna be upset, and then we have things that then have to be shifted over to the next, date, because we have board members that do have to come home and can't. If we were all to agree on, like, we're gonna do 3 hours of public comment, whatever it is, but then we're also gonna sit here and get through our whole agenda, no matter what time that is, then yes, but I think we have to also find a medium ground with the board to say, hey, we're gonna have to make some moves. Because we do wanna hear, and like I said, it's gonna take leveraging from the superintendent to be able to address the big groups, I think there, and say, hey, now is the board gonna be willing to have maybe a one-on-one or with the superintendent, a meeting, her have the flexibility to be like, hey, if you guys are wanting to talk about this, and there's 300 people here, because we're also talking about coming from spaces where we've learned to organize, right?
Mhm.
You come in the masses, then you're not willing to bring 300 people and have 10 people speak. So how can we make it easier for them to be heard without having to be heard that minute? So just throwing it out there for the board on, like, what are some of those shifts that we're willing to make? And some of the accommodations that we as a board are willing to take on to hear everyone's public comment that night. And then we can move on.
Sorry,
I'm getting
from these
executive.
public comment, right?
Public
It's,
comment.
it's challenging, and it does put a heavy burden on staff to police, you know, kind of what the public comments are gonna be. And then to the extent you really want your community to have an opportunity, and then maybe you create some fairways. If over 20 people, it automatically will be 1 minute for everybody. Or if over 30 people, it'll be 1 minute for everybody. Because this idea, maybe you guys look at something and say, 1 hour max of public comment, that's about what we want to do, or maybe that's 45 minutes, or maybe it's 30 minutes, because you do have to weigh your agenda. So I'll move on because I do think I'm going long.
All of those things, we, you know, we can make all of that, or none of that happen.
We'll put them in your notes.
That's for a governance, a separate governance training. Okay,
Yeah, I
so,
mean, so we could just discuss it, bring it to the board and be like, okay, these are the options, just like we did with the conflict of interest. These are some choices. What do you want to do?
okay. All right, so getting back to maybe the substance of the public comments, we cannot prohibit public criticism about policies, procedures, programs. I think really even your performance as a board member. There was a comment made earlier, which is, you know, we just end up getting tired of getting yelled at. That's the job, right? That's the gig. And so, as long as you understand that as a member of the public, people will criticize you. They're gonna say things that aren't true. They may call you corrupt. They may say things that I think in a normal scenario, if you weren't a member of the board, you would feel very offended and you'd want to respond. As a board member, you have to accept that that's part of your job. Now, they don't get to threaten you. They don't get to do certain things. They don't get to, you know, be wildly offensive. But again, I had a big situation down in Ventura where there were a lot of problematic comments that were being made. And so the board president was really invested a lot of time trying to, you know, can I go after this comment or can I do this and do that? In the end, the board member just kind of, or the board president kind of making it live a little bit longer and longer. In the end, sometimes it's better to let that person run through the comments. And then when they're done, remind the rest of the public, here's the rules for making comments, and you're free to have critiques, you're free to make comments about people, but you shouldn't be offensive, you shouldn't threaten people.
And how do we manage, I think even our board wanting to retaliate or once we get public comment, having a board address some concerns that were brought up from public comment?
Well, first things first, I don't think the moment is usually the right place to do that. And so what I mean is somebody just kind of got up, said something very inflammatory, right? And about, you know, board member Villegas. They came right at me. For me to then respond in the moment is probably not the best thing. And number one, if I'm not the board president, I don't think I should be the one really running the meeting anyways, right? I would ask the board president for the right to speak. And if I'm the board president, I might say, we're not going to address that comment, if to the extent that, you know, as part of your board member report, that you feel like you need to make some kind of announcement, you're welcome to do so. We're not gonna waste more time by digging into a personal back and forth. So I think the board president unfortunately has a lot of pressure to kind of make sure that the meeting is moving on the right place. But if I were counseling board members, I would say, you have to put that poker face on, and that's kind of the game. You ran for office, you won. And now you are there for that criticism, even if it's completely unfair and even if it's really offensive, you know, chances are, you know, it's better just to move with it and not to spend too much time on it.
So the issue about a slur during public comment has been brought up in the past. And I think that there's obviously nuance to specifically the slurs, because a bad word that we would consider a bad word, my understanding is that we cannot stop the public comment from continuing. We just have to let them know, hey, please watch what you're saying. There's kids listening or whatever. But a slur, like let's say for example, the N-word being said, like we can stop public comment in those situations, correct? Like the board president can say, but like, what would your recommendation be to another board member to be able to step in and support the board president in that specific moment, especially if the comment is towards the board president or towards the superintendent or something like that, right? Like a few years ago, we had someone say a racial slur, I guess, sorry, I should specify, towards the superintendent? Like, what can we do in those specific cases?
Yeah, first things first, I wouldn't want your board president to be out there on their own,
Right.
trying to figure out how best to weigh into a situation. And this is where I come back to the bylaws. I would want to make sure that my bylaws have addressed this and have thought about when you have people who are offensive, who are trying to interrupt the meeting, they're potentially threatening comments. So I would want the bylaws to reflect that so that any board president, whoever it is, has a script, has a formula on how to respond. And that's one of the biggest challenges is the board president looking at the bylaws. I don't really know what to do. Maybe legal's in the room, maybe they're not. And here's the other piece is when you formalize it and you put it in the bylaw, you now can have legal take a look at it and say to the extent that there's free expression issues, limited public forum issues, we're not doing something that shuts down, is illegal. We're doing something that complements the law. So what I'm saying is get your whole board together, get some bylaw language that potentially addresses the situation, then have legal vet it to make sure you're in a good place. Now, as you get into that, now there will be some judgment calls, right? So there will be a decision where the board president has to decide, do I want to call this out right here in the moment? And then potentially get into a back and forth where I'm, getting into it with a member of the public and they're yelling and then we're telling staff to kind of cut off their mic. That's going to turn it into a whole mess, right? Or as soon as they're done, and I had this exact situation come up, as soon as they're done, then the board president said, I want to remind everybody of board bylaw 1234 that prohibits racial comments, or prohibits A, B, and C, and these things, offensive comments, potentially threatening comments, and these will not be permitted. So I want to caution the public to refrain from these types of comments. And that way, the board president is not going rogue and just enforcing their rules. The board president is enforcing the rules of the board. Is that helpful? Now, that's not something you get to overnight. That's something that takes investment in time and governance and looking at your board bylaws and potentially legal review to make sure you're doing it in the right way.
Well, I think between a policy and between some scripting and some, maybe even some decision charting, that could get not perfect, but better.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I remember one of the first big forums I did where I think it was like a DAC meeting, maybe an ELAC, and this lady came to the mic and we're 2 minutes into it. And I was trying to deal with the point of order and kind of Robert's rules and she had a nice hat on and came down to the microphone, looked like a really nice lady. And she said, I know what the problem is, everybody. I know what the problem is. Mr. Villegas is racist, and then she like dropped the mic and the whole room blew up. And we just had to move on from that. They didn't know me. I had been there for 2 minutes. The meeting had just started, but refraining from responding kept the meeting on track. So that was my role for that day. All right, closed sessions. And I'm going to move a little faster because I know you guys have other business. I don't want to keep you here all day. Bottom line, closed session can only be for things that are authorized under the Brown Act or the Education Code. It's probably one of the more frequent calls that we get from superintendents and staff. How do we agendize this? What should this look like? The quick answer is there's a really clear listing of closed session exceptions. If you don't see it there, chances are you shouldn't be talking about it in closed session. So one of the trickier things is boards often want to take matters that they don't want to talk about in public and move it into closed session. If it doesn't fit one of these things, I would say don't do that. You're going to need to have the pain of having the conversation in open session. If it can go there, then it can go there. But keep in mind, if you're voting on something and you get challenged by the public, then it leads to the potential that vote is null and void because it shouldn't have been in closed session in the first place. So just keep that in mind. All right, personnel matters, that's typically one of the easiest ones that go into closed session. But if you're going to talk about specific complaints or charges against an employee, you have to give them Brown Act notice and then 24-hour notice. And then they have the right to have the complaints and charges heard in open session. So I won't. Every once in a while you get somebody who's like, yes, please air my dirty laundry in open session. And then what they don't realize is that doesn't mean the board's going to deliberate in front of them in open session. That just means somebody's going to read it and say, okay, this is all the stuff that, John Smith wants to be heard, have read out in open session. They did this, they did that. Now that this has been heard in open session, the board will now go to closed session to deliberate, just like they always do on a personnel action. So something to keep in mind. Okay, let's keep moving to pending litigation. This is probably one of the biggest ones that gets legal in the room. So you'll see conference with legal counsel as pending litigation, existing litigation against the district, anticipated litigation, and then if you're deciding whether or not you're going to sue somebody, deciding whether to initiate litigation. Okay, student matters. There's very few things I hang my hat on in the education code, but usually student privacy is one of them. I always feel very righteous. If we are protecting student privacy, we will go to Supreme Court and back to protect student privacy. So if you're talking about a student issue, that's something that, you know, in virtually every single example that I can think of would be done in closed session. The student would not be identified. Okay. All right. I don't think I'm going the wrong way, so I'll go the right way, and we'll keep moving. Student matters, we talked about. The expulsions are a little different. Final action to expel a student has to be taken in open session. Oftentimes, the board is still going to deliberate on some of the details. So you'll have education staff will come in, talk about the expulsion. Okay, great. And when we go into open, we're gonna take our vote. Again, you're still not disclosing the student names. Negotiations are also a little bit different. The EERA permits the school board to meet in closed session to talk about the negotiations without agendizing it. What I see virtually every board I work with still agendizes it under, you know, personnel or labor negotiations. So if you guys are not agendizing it because you have the exception, that's fine. I also know a lot of boards that still put on their conflict labor negotiator and to get an update. So no judgment either way about how you guys do that. Just depends on what the style of the board is. All right. One thing, if you're getting close to getting a deal, there are some exceptions where if we need to get direction from the board, you can pull the board members if you're in the middle of a labor situation. So just know all of that is unacceptable under the Brown Act. Security matters. So again, you don't see this one very often, but if you had to get to discuss a threat about some specific threat to, you know, water, drinking water, things like that, that can be an exception that gets you into closed session. That one is kind of obscure. Real property negotiations are a little bit more common. So if you need to tell the negotiators what the price in terms of payment are going to be, then you certainly can do that in closed session. What you shouldn't be doing in closed session is just talking about all your properties and saying, you know, which one should we sell? Should we do this? What should we offer? I think that is something that probably that discussion needs to be in open session. So if you need to schedule a Saturday special meeting to talk about all the properties, if you're looking at selling or converting something, do that part in open session. When you get into the real negotiations, but make sure it's real negotiation, that conversation can be in closed session. All right. So closed session agendas, you have to identify it on what you're going to go, what the exception is going to be, has to be identified on the agenda. One thing I'll throw out there is a lot of boards will have what they call standing items. That's not really the intent of the Brown Act. So if you have something, let's say the personnel exception is a common standing item. What I would caution is if you intend to talk about a personnel issue, then that's appropriate to have on there. But it shouldn't be an umbrella item that now we can just throw any personnel issue that we want to talk about. Because when you made that personnel exception, you really weren't talking about John Smith. You were going to go in about James Smith. But just be careful there that it might be an unintended kind of Brown Act violation. Now, it's something that probably won't come out in the wash, but just keep in mind, standing items are not exactly what the Brown Act intended. All right. I'm going to keep moving. Report out requirements. So after that closed session, if you took a vote, you have to report out, unless the final approval rests with another party or disclosure would hamper the initiation or defense of litigation. So there's a difference in my mind between the superintendent needing to move forward on some kind of matter in closed session and looking for a consensus from the board. Is there a consensus on how we're going to proceed in the immediate future? That is not something that necessarily needs to be reported out because no vote's taking place. I'm just looking to my board. I'm the superintendent. I'm giving a very sensitive and confidential personnel update to the board. And this issue is not going to be resolved. It's not going to be done. I'm updating the board. Maybe it's a one-way update. I'm just telling the board, or didn't give me any direction. Maybe it is an issue that's going to be ongoing, and I got a consensus from the board on how I'm going to proceed. That's not something that's being reported out. Now, if the board is voting on something, now there's an actual vote. That vote needs to be tallied. That vote needs to be reported out later. unless, there's an exception in the law. There's a few of them. There's an exception in the law for teacher dismissals. There's an exception in the law for, say, for example, if a settlement agreement, right, the board approves the terms of the settlement agreement, but the other party hasn't signed. So if there's nothing final happening, no report out is necessary. So just keep in mind, there's some nuances when it comes to reporting out from closed session. All right, that's the exception I talked about with personnel matters. I think that's the first one you see. The agreements, all those things, and student matters, no information shall be released in violation of student privacy rights. I'm gonna keep moving, because I'm probably past my time now. We talked about real estate negotiators and litigation. I'm gonna keep going. Let's get into confidentiality. So bottom line,
Did that have the screen updated?
Yeah, it just takes a while.
Okay.
okay, so I'm on 53 confidentiality here, so I'm hoping it's gonna catch up.
51.
Okay, all right. So bottom line, board members are prohibited from disclosing information that was obtained during closed session, except to people who are authorized to get that information. Now, keep in mind, let's talk about the budget, right? So, if you're having trouble sleeping at night, read a school district budget. That will knock you out pretty quickly. I'm not a numbers guy, clearly. So, budgets are things that can be a little tedious to read. And so just because you took the budget into closed session and talked about things in the budget doesn't now mean the entire budget is something that is closed session confidentiality, closed session confidential. The budget is the budget, right? So we have to divide between information that was obtained in closed session that is actually confidential information versus information that's already public. Now, that can be kind of tricky sometimes, but if it's already public, that is not closed session confidential. What could be confidential in closed session is what the board plans to do about something. That typically is what is confidential. So it's the what and the how that you're going to address something. So when you violate closed session confidentiality, it
I'm back on. Do we get to continue? Okay, you may continue.
okay, and that is the meaning of life. So liability for disclosing confidential information, just remember, board members can be personally liable if they violate closed session confidentiality and could potentially be removed from office. It's a serious offense, and it's something that the local district attorney will investigate if there's been a complaint. So keep in mind. I'm gonna stop there so that we have a little bit of time for questions, and I'm gonna stop sharing the presentation.
Trustee Rebley.
Okay, I have some questions in the sake of time, but we'll try to be brief. So just to go back over, if you have a standing committee, 2 members are appointed. If one is, 2 members are appointed to be permanents, can you appoint an alternate?
I think we talked about there
Yes,
being an
right.
alternate, and because it's a standing committee, because it's been agendized and it's gonna be part of a normal meeting, that's not an issue with sending an alternate.
Yes, okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, then, okay, so for ad hoc committees, appointed for a certain length of time, can you have an alternate to that?
I think our preference would be not to have an
No.
alternate, because you don't want to swap in and out the members of an ad hoc committee, because they're private meetings. They're not open to the public, and then that leads to the potential where, okay, if I'm the first 2 members and I know A, B, and C is going this way on the particular topic, now a 3rd member comes in, there's a potential that we're creating a serial meeting around an ad hoc committee.
Okay, next is we have liaisons, so what we'll do is we'll be like LCAP committee. Okay, you're gonna be the expert in LCAP, you're gonna follow, all that. We usually appoint 2. Are 2 people showing up for this, or is it 1? Hey, I'm sick, you go.
Are these the ad hoc committees?
They're liaisons, they're parent committees. 7-Eleven
It's
committee.
what we forward you from legal counsel.
Yeah, I think, in my mind, if you have 2 people who are assigned to the committee, I would encourage both people to attend. It's
Both
not-
to attend.
Well, if both they both are assigned, they're not an alternate, right? Yeah,
They're purpose.
Right, well, I haven't been going because I thought I was the alternate.
I think at this point, I think it's no harm, no foul, but is this an ad hoc committee?
No, they're not,
They're-
the LCAP committee
they're
is not
It's
you know.
more, it's like a standing committee because they meet.
Are they
Right.
But it's
agendizing
not-
meetings?
But they are not board appointed. They are not board appointed except for, well, DLI is not required. But like MDAC,
Okay,
okay, we assign a board liaison to MDAC to be familiar with what's going on in that committee, have an understanding.
I would double check to see whether or not you truly are an alternate. And so if you're an alternate, then it sounds like the system is working the way it should, and the person who's named has been going. But if you have 2 people who are named as liaisons to a particular committee or a meeting that's taking place, then I would have both people go.
Okay, so we do officially do that in January.
Okay.
Who wants to be, the board president may make a recommendation, we talk about it.
Right.
I want this, you do this, you do that, and then we approve it. So it is an official action by the board of us.
That's right, and we're not changing that mid-year. And all I'm
No.
suggesting is go back to how we set it up in January and double check our notes. If we had 2 people assigned to that committee, then those people should be attending.
Okay, then,
Sorry, can we follow up on that? Let's see if it's okay. I think the challenge with that is that unlike board committees in which any of us could observe, we've been told by legal counsel, for those committees, we can't go observe. Did you have an opinion on that piece at all?
I think let's use the example where if you have 2 liaisons, right? So 2 liaisons are assigned to this meeting that's taking place. I think it makes sense that your 3rd person does not go, because now you just hit a majority of the board. So I agree with that, because now it's connected to district business. I'm not sure exactly what the topics are, but there's enough of a connection that you have now potentially have a Brown Act issue. And if you don't have a specific Brown Act issue, you have the perception that there's a majority of the board here. So I used an example earlier where I said, if I'm rolling into this meeting, let's say I got an invite from a member of the community, I can't remember what happened in January, so I'm not thinking about that necessarily. And all of a sudden I log into a Zoom and I see that there's already 2 board members and I make 3, I might say, you know what? Good to see everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and log out because I see a couple of my fellow board members here. It's probably better if I log out to, as this, we don't want to make it a Brown Act meeting. And so something as simple as that. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So just a recommendation to the board, on that sheet that we do in January, I think that better titles of what we're doing. This is a standing committee, this is an ad hoc committee, these are liaisons, and then the bylaws would better reflect the sheet, and it might be clearer, so that's just one idea. Question on, supporting materials on your agenda. You are not required to include supporting materials, correct? Are there any times when you must have?
It's correct that you're not required. There's not a specific Brown Act requirement that you have to have whatever the supporting material is there, agendized. Most boards I work with try to
We
do
do,
that.
yeah.
They try to have all that material up there, but there's sometimes something's not ready, it hasn't happened. So I think the disconnect for me is the board has to have what it's voting on. And so you want to make sure that the board is actually looking at, let's say it's a settlement agreement, let's say it's something like that. If the board doesn't actually have it, what are they voting on? Right? So I think the it has to exist. Now, there's other Brown Act provisions and PRA provisions that talk about if the board is given something within 72 hours, then that has to be made available either online or at the district office, and it has to be made promptly available. So to your point, there's not a specific Brown Act requirement that supporting material has to be agendized, but if the board is voting on it, then I would say the board has to have a copy. And if the board has a copy, then that needs to be made public. So keep that in mind.
Just going back to trustee Reckler's questions around the clarification of committee assignments. Should that be reflected in, so if we're clarifying, making it more clear, should that be reflected in the handbook? In our governance handbook as well as in our bylaws, or is it just the handbook?
I like it in the handbook. I haven't reviewed your bylaws to see if you guys have a huge description of every committee. And if you don't, I would not necessarily jump into a bylaw. I think it sounds like handbook business where you have a discussion of committees, maybe even have a quick summary of what we've talked about, because this isn't the easiest stuff to get in 1 or 2 bites. So I'd like the idea of your handbook having some of the basic rules of Brown Act. Here's the standing committees we have, here's the ad hoc committees that we have, here's the liaison appointments we have, and something that clarifies that and what the expectations are for board members.
So to answer that, we're updating everything right now. CSBA had a pretty good layout in the committee policy of who does what and we expanded it with a little bit more on the descriptive side because we had gotten some legal counsel, and so we were like, okay, let's put this in because we got it. So it is in the policy. It is also in the governance handbook, but as we go through, we should probably better align, but we have a better, it's clearer now.
That makes sense. And we love CSBA. And here's the other thing. When you do something that CSBA is doing, it's not a protection against all things. And
No.
that's why legal is always going to be around the edges
Yes.
to help you tailor your materials. But the good news of it is you're moving with the body of board members who are doing it. You don't necessarily want to be a pioneer in doing certain things with the Brown Act and certain things as a board. It's nice to go with CSBA because other boards are going to follow suit. So it's always a good example. It's a good starting point.
May I interrupt for a second and ask a clarifying question? When you're talking about meetings, so the way that this spreadsheet is in January, it says appointments, then it says sorry, I muted myself. It says appointment, says the name of the district committee. Then it says district committee liaisons, and then it says appointment, and then it says alternate, says ALT for alternate. Some of these meetings that are under these district committees are open to the public. Most of them are. For example, you have the CAC, which is our Community Advisory Committee around special education. It is publicized on the district website. It's on the calendar. It is an open meeting to the public. because it's an open meeting to the public, that means that board members may attend, but to your point, they go back to the very first thing you said when we were having this type of conversation, which is you don't speak. You don't speak, you don't ask questions, you stay silent. Is that accurate? Am I following what you're saying?
I think so, and I don't have the full context of all the lists of all the liaisons that you have, but I don't think I need it. What I hear you saying is there are public meetings, and if there's a public meeting, does the board member forego all the rights of being a member of the public? Of course they don't. But to the point that I made at the very beginning is if a board member is attending something as a member of the public, then they should refrain from speaking. They should make it clear that they are not there as a member representing the board. But they have to be careful because again, the perception of a Brown Act violation can be just as wasteful as an actual violation.
I don't want to contradict you, but that's not what legal counsel told us. Two different firms told us that for example, CAC or DLCAP, only the appointed board members may attend. Otherwise, it's a Brown Act violation because of the changes to the Brown Act that happened in January, I guess. So I think that it's just a difference of what we call them.
I think that's where I'm getting bogged down because I don't have them all in front of me. And so I agreed with those opinions that you got, that there are some meetings where they should not go because they aren't actually appointed to it. So I would need probably to see all those together before kind of opining on it. I don't want to give something so general that gives the board kind of different advice.
But I just want to make clear to all of us here that that's why the board president sent that email to all of us, that we have to be really conscious that if it's a CAC meeting, only the appointed people should go. If not, what we've told staff is that the appointed board member will ask staff to kick you off.
Yeah.
Because we can't blindly ignore the Brown Act because others will be complying with a potential, illegal action. So I think that we just have to all be clear that if you show up to one of those and you're not, unfortunately, you will be kicked out because you're not a member of the public in those meetings.
Yeah, I think this ties in with what we're talking about with the governance handbook, right? This is where we want that clarity because you can't.
Excuse me for 1 second. I think we also need to be clear that if it's a Brown Act committee that has been agendized and it's for public consumption, then all members of the public, whether elected or not, if you are a member of the public, then you have access to attend that meeting. But as a board member in your elected capacity, you cannot speak. Is that not accurate, or is that where you're getting the variant opinions?
Yeah, that's not accurate, Trustee Smith-Folds. That's where we got two different opinions on. That you are not allowed to attend, even if it's a Brown Act committee by the parents. It's not a board-led committee, which is the difference of the Brown Act change. Listen, I don't care if we all attend, like we've always attended. It's not our thing. But now that we've been told legally we cannot do it, we cannot ignore it.
Any other questions? Any other? And I don't.
Continue.
Yeah, I think you guys have already gotten legal opinions on this, and so I'm not trying to give you anything that's different. I think what I will recognize is that it's nuanced. And so if the board doesn't have clear direction on what to do, say, for example, in the governance handbook, there's gonna be, I think, mistakes in interpretation on, does this apply to me, does this not? Am I the alternate or am I not? Should I attend this or should I not?
And it comes to perception too. Wording matters. So if it's the perception of the Brown Act looks like it could be violated, perception is different than you are not allowed to attend. So I think all of the clarity is around the language. And I think if you go to 15 different lawyers, you'll get 15 different opinions. I think that is because of the language. I think that the way that, and I guess it would be easily more available for you to give us an opinion if you saw the document that we're speaking of. But the documents that we're speaking of, it says one liaison and then it says an alternate, right? An alternate. And that's not for all of the committees. Some committees just have one person assigned to them with no alternate. That's blank, right? So then if another board member goes, then that board member would not be in violation of the Brown Act because it's only two people there. And it doesn't look like it's three people there. So I think, again, perception is key. Also, is there something in the Brown Act, either current or past, and I'm thinking more current, is there something in the Brown Act that says if you have three people there, and the first two talk, those are the only two that can talk, correct? Because if a third person comes in and talks, that creates a board meeting. Is that accurate or not accurate?
I don't know that it's just the mere talking. I think we're gonna get lost in some of the minutia between standing versus ad hoc versus liaisons. And so at 11:20, I don't know that we wanna keep diving deeper into that. Hold on, I'm sorry, there was a comment here.
No, I just had a comment on, I think, the clarification, because there are some committees that don't have an alternate, and that was due to the assignment when we did go to choose who was gonna be the liaison or alternate. Some committees only had a liaison because there was no one to take on the capacity of alternate.
Mhm.
So those potentially committees are still open to an alternate if a board member chooses to be an alternate on those committees. The ones that do have alternates, we were told by legal that those are the two only that are able to step into the meeting. There's other committees that, because we were already pulled really thin, they didn't get an alternate, they only got a liaison.
And the only thing I would add to that is the board would still need to name that alternate. I don't
Yeah.
think somebody should say, I'm gonna go be an alternate at this meeting today.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, like, there's, committees that don't have alternates, so a board member could still choose to say, hey, I wanna be an alternate on this committee and be the one representing, because there are spaces that we didn't have enough, enough participation to fill those spaces.
And I think that should be brought to the board at a regular meeting,
Yeah.
and the board could potentially take action on that, or next January, the issue could be addressed.
Okay, cool. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any other, I shouldn't say any other questions, because I think we've gone long. So,
Because we'll be talking.
yeah, that's right. No more public comment, right? So, but, thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to work with you, and I hope to see you guys again.
Thank you, that was helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we take 5 minutes?
Yeah, can we take a 5-minute break, Rosa?
Should have been in my head.
We're back on. I need to. Sorry. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. We are now moving on to closed session at 11:31 a.m. and we will come back to open session at 2 p.m. Thank you.